Good evening, everybody. Even though this topic of a Torah approach to the recent wave of terror is very much on my mind, and I'm sure many people's mind, I hesitated to speak about this topic for a number of reasons. One is that some topics you can speak about and everyone walks out. Some topics, either you can have some very big fans and some very big enemies, and I was concerned about that. And also, as I'll explain, in order to speak about this topic, you really have to know a lot of Torah and a lot of what's going on in the world scene. As a matter of fact, however, last week, as of Friday afternoon, Erev Shabbos, I wasn't sure what I would be speaking about, because this was on my mind, and it's very hard to think of a topic when there's one specific topic on your mind. And then right before Shabbos, I'm sure as many of us heard, the tragedy of a family going to celebrate a Shabbat Chatan, and the father and the brother are killed. And realizing that there was a tragic story behind this, and then understanding that every time somebody is killed is a tragic story, and we just don't know the story all the time, decided that for my own benefit, I have to express maybe what I think about it. But there's another reason. There's a lot that's being discussed on the internet today, many topics that are very relevant to Jews. And I've noticed that many people are saying, giving opinions, without trying to understand first what the Torah says about these topics. The Torah is timeless, and of course we have to understand what the Torah says first. As a matter of fact, last night, as I was preparing the shir, I decided to listen to a shir my father gave in 1989 when he was honored by the Chevron Foundation, which really has nothing to do with the topic tonight, believe it or not. But he did start off and said, I was raised by my parents to always follow the halacha. And therefore, any question we have to look first to see what the Torah says about it. You know, the Mizrach Magid, who was the prime disciple of Baal Shem Tov, so his son was referred to as Rav Avram HaMalach. Rav Avram HaMalach's son was referred to as Rav Shalom Provishter, who changed the derech of the Mizrach Magid and his father, and from there started the line of Chasidus that believed that maybe Hasidic Rebbeim should live with luxuries and wealth. He was the father of Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhin. But when Rabbi Shalom Provishter died on Erev Sukkos, Rabbi Yisrael didn't take over yet. His older brother of Avram took over. And he held his first tish on Sukkos night. First night Sukkos, the night after his father passed away. And sitting around the table were his Hasidim, and some of his older Hasidim had a taina, were upset. He says, what gave you a right to decide you are the Rebbe about consulting from us? And Rabbi Avraham, the son of Rav Shalom Provishter, told him a story. He said there was once a king, and the king built a beautiful palace. And he wanted to make sure that the palace was perfect. And therefore he said that anybody who can find a flaw in this palace should come to me, and I'll grant him a reward. And a man comes and looking, obviously everyone wants a little money, a few extra bucks, and he sees that there's a problem with the picture. It's a picture of a drunk person holding a cup of wine. And he goes over to the king and he says to the king, you know that the picture is wrong. Why? He says a drunk person is holding a full cup of wine. Since when can a drunk person hold a full cup of wine? The wine always spills, and it has to be a half a cup of wine. And the king heard what he said. He was very happy, gave him some money. So then he realized, he's on a roll. So I had to look for other things that were wrong. Then there was a picture of a crown, of a jewel. And he said to the king, there's something wrong with this jewel in the crown. So the king told his guards, take this fellow and go ahead and whip him. So the fellow didn't understand. He said, listen, if you're going to tell me something about a drunk fellow holding a cup of wine, that I understand. You know something about. But who are you to tell me about a crown and a jewel? You know nothing about a crown and a jewel. Now, obviously, the idea that Rabbi Avram Vishnu was telling his Hasidim, what do you know about who a Rebbe should be? The same thing when it comes to certain topics. If a person is not going to look into the Torah and understand the sugya first, then they don't understand the thing about any topic. And the Torah is timeless, and we have to look at the Torah. So what do I know about the Torah? I also don't know that much, but I'll explain what maybe I know a little bit about. If you go ahead and a lot of the halachas that might come of how to deal with our enemies who are trying to destroy us, a person might say it's not practical, maybe it's somewhat not applicable, and maybe we shouldn't look at the Torah. So first I'd like to quote from what my uncle says in Halachic Man. My uncle discussed, first of all, what is cognitive man, what is home religious man, then he speaks of Halachic man. He says like this: what I do know is when the Torah says, maybe on some level might not be practical, but we have to learn the Torah, he says, we have to, in the Halachic man, he says that while many halachic concepts do not correspond to a phenomenon of the real world, he says, halachic man is not at all distressed. His deepest desire is not the realization all the time of the halacha, but rather the ideal construction which is given to him from Sinai, and this ideal exists forever. So halachic man has to always try to know what the Torah wants, and then to see how it can apply to the world. And just to finish off with my introduction, my father, in a speech he gave in the 80s, pointed out, based on the pasuk in Mishlei, "V'chacham yivnevayis u'v'fusfuna yischonon u'b'das chadarim yimalei." Now, when we speak about building, there's chachma, bina, and das. And what is chachma? Chachma is knowledge. Bina is derived knowledge. What I derive from the knowledge I know, the learned wisdom. And das is ruach hakodesh, common sense. And he pointed out the first step is chachma. A person can't try to think what the Torah would say if you don't learn what the Torah says first. So now I'd like to begin and explain the difficulty. So I don't have, when it comes to these topics, I don't think I have das. I don't think I have bina. But I think that I learned to sugya a little bit, so maybe a little chachma I have. And it's important to understand the chachma of how we respond to a wave of terror when our enemies are trying to destroy us. Just to begin to give an idea, the challenge, if you look at source number 1, it's Rambam Hilchas Avodah Zarah, Perek Tesalocha Tezayin. It's based in the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah. The Rambam says that a Jewish girl, a midwife, is not allowed to help a pagan girl. In those days, most of the non-Jewish girls were pagans, to give birth. Why? Because you are helping bring into the world a pagan, another pagan. Because the child of this girl will probably be a pagan also. And he goes on, however, if it is a mialedes b'schar, someone who will be given money, so then you're allowed to. Why? Because if you go ahead and you refuse, that might cause Ava. It might cause the non-Jews to hate us. And the reason why we're not allowed to go ahead and help bring a non-Jewish child, a pagan child, I should say, into this world is because of lo sachanim. We're not supposed to do anything nice for the pagans. For the pagans, he says, and helping give birth to one of their children is something nice. However, if we're doing it because of Ava, we're not doing it because we want to help them. We're doing it because we don't want to hurt ourselves. So we understand this halacha. However, Ava is a very strong concept. Ava's idea is that even though there are certain things that might be usher when we deal with our enemies, however, it is a concept of Ava. The Ritva in source number 2 points out that even when Ava, something is allowed because of Ava, to help a pagan, and I'm using that word deliberately right now, to help a pagan, that's only when you're not going to be over Nissa D'Oraisa or Nissa D'Rabbanan. Because remember, it's only in order not to be over Lo Sechanim. You're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to do something because of Ava. But are you over an Isser of Shabbos? Of course not. So however, we see that sometimes there are certain things that are allowed, and they are allowed because of Ava. However, we can't be over any Isser. We can't be over an Isser. However, you can't be over any Isser in order to help someone who is a pagan. We could just, any Isser Shabbos or any other Isser not connected at all to the Isser of Lo Sechanim. Now, what do if we learn that maybe there's something we should do according to the Torah, and we're afraid of world opinion? What do we do then? Are we allowed to be over? The Torah tells us this is how we should react to our enemies. I'll give an example, just an example. There was a whole discussion, and I don't know if anyone read, but I really suggest reading Rabbi Benjamin Blech's. He wrote an op-ed in Arutz Sheva about treating terrorists who were injured in a terrorist attack. And he basically points out that the Geneva Convention might have allowances and privileges for prisoners of war, but there's no privileges for terrorists, no privileges. And he obviously recommends not to treat terrorists. But let's say, and we'll see in a few minutes that according to the Torah, you should not treat terrorists either. But let's say you have to treat the terrorists because you're afraid of world opinion. Should you treat, not treat, go against the halacha and the Torah? That's a very difficult question I don't know the answer to. However, if you look at Rav Kook, and this is the question we have to always keep in mind. Rav Kook in source number 3 in Mishpat Kohen. Always keep this in mind. So Rav Kook's discussing that, let's say, for example, someone has to do something which might go against the Torah to save Klal Yisrael. And a certain Rav pointed out that you have to get Rishus from Bezdin. And Rav Kook says in source number 3, Mishpat Kohen, he says that someone is doing this in order to save Klal Yisrael, he's already considered a Shliach HaBezdin. He says, V'chol hazocha b'zeh, anyone who merits to do this to save Klal Yisrael, shluchusayu to Bezdin ka'avid. And Rav said, no, only to save Jews from being over a terrible listen to Torah. And Rav Kook quotes a wonderful chazal. If you look at the end of source number 3, Mishpat Kohen Simon Kuf Mem Daled, it says, Shnei dvarim yesh ba'olam. There are two things in the world, v'ani ovam bilvavi, and I love them in my heart. Ava Gemura, a complete love. The Tamanid Veler of Leo. The Elohein Torah v'Yisrael. I love the Torah. I love these Jews, Yisrael. Abul Eini Yodea Ezem Mehem Kodem. I don't know what comes first. Amarti lo b'ni darkam shebnei Adam omrim HaTorah kodma. Shenemar kodem Hashem kani reishis darko. People will tell you the Torah comes first. But the Tamanid Veler says, Abul ni Omer, Yisrael Kadmu. The Jews come first because Kodesh Yisrael Hashem. It doesn't mean, God forbid, we should be over the Isser of idolatry. Can't be over idolatry. However, we do know that Yael was over the Isser of Gilead Arayas in order to save Klal Yisrael. Kodesh Yisrael Hashem, the Jews are most important. And therefore, every time we have to consider what to do, how to react. And maybe if we react in a certain way or don't react in a certain way, it might be against the Torah. We have to consider what is going to save Klal Yisrael. And if public opinion is going to save Klal Yisrael, fine. But if public opinion is not going to save Klal Yisrael, we're not allowed to give in to public opinion. We're not allowed to. Because the bottom line is public opinion, they don't care about Klal Yisrael. I said, recently countries, Sweden, saying that it's because of Jews the attack happened in Paris. And I guarantee you, if God forbid, Iran decides one day to send a nuclear bomb somewhere, they will blame the Jews for it. There's no question in my mind. There's no question in my mind. And so, therefore, we have to always consider, before we start a shir, the most important thing is, even though some things might not be practical to implement right now, we should maybe think about the future. But as Rav Kook points out in the most important thing is Klal Yisrael. There's nothing as important as Klal Yisrael. I just want to digress for 1 minute. Ramat Beit Shemesh is in the middle of a, Baruch Hashem, a construction zone. We're building for many Jews to make Aliyah. However, being in a construction zone brings along with its problems. As we know, the pigua that happened in Tel Aviv today was committed by a Palestinian worker with an Ishur Avodah. And we have, unfortunately, hundreds of these Palestinian workers, across the street from my house. So one night, there are rules. The rules are you can't be on the building site at night. So one day last year, it was just after one of the pigum in Yerushalayim, my wife noticed around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night across the street that one of the offices had a light on. So she called the police, or she called City Hall, and they said to her, "What do you want?" It's a democracy. My wife didn't quote Rav Kook or the Tanna B'Eliyahu, But he says there's nothing more important than the Jews. You can take democracy, you can take liberalism. There is nothing more important than the Jewish people. And she said to them, that was just after a baby was killed at I think a train station. With your democracy, a baby was killed yesterday. I have to say they did send somebody, and actually Bet Shemesh is very good to check things out. But that is the most, whatever Cook quotes is Tanav Elio, this is the most important Tanav Elio. There's nothing more important than the welfare of the Jewish nation and the Jewish people. Okay, now we can begin. However, before we begin to understand how difficult it is, I'd like you to see source number 4. Source number 4 speaks about Yesov, even though today we're speaking primarily about Yishmael, but I think it's the Malbim that points out that Esav and Yishmael are very similar. They want to destroy the Jewish people right now. So Esav, after the brachas, he says, Yikravu Yemei Evel Aviv. The days of mourning of my father will come close. And Chazal asked the question, and then I'll kill Yaakov. So Chazal asked, why does it say Yikravu, not Yagiyu? Why come close, not Yagiyu? So the Shitas Rabbanon, in source number 4, is fascinating. Esav was very concerned if he would kill Yaakov, because the best in the Shem Ve'ever would come after him. The best in the Shem Ve'ever was much more reasonable than the Bagatz. They understand that some people deserve to be executed. And he says, if I go kill Yaakov, the best in the Shem Ve'ever will come after me. So he says, what should I do? So he says, I'm going to go ahead to Yishmael. I'm going to go marry Yishmael's daughter. And people will think, wow, he's a tzaddik. Why is he marrying Yishmael's daughter? Because Yitzchak does not like that he should marry Benos Canaan. That's what the Medrash says. And then when I come to Yishmael, this is how the Netziv explains the Medrash, I will speak to them about what's going on, and I'll incite Yishmael that Yitzchak took the brachas from him, took the Yerusha from him, to be in that line from Avram Avinu. And Yishmael will go kill Yitzchak. And then, because why? Because Yosef was actually upset, according to the Chazal, at Yitzchak also, because Yitzchak confirmed the brachas that he gave to Yaakov. So Yishmael, he says Yishmael will kill Yitzchak. And then, once Yishmael kills Yitzchak, I can go ahead and kill Yishmael, because I'm the Goel Hadam of my father, I'm the relative of my father, and I'll knock Yaakov off also, and I'll be the only one remaining. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? He said, everyone will think I'm a tzaddik. I went to marry somebody because my father wanted me to marry someone who wasn't a Canaanite. So he says, and that's why it says Yikravu, not Yagiyu. Yikravu, I will make my father's mourning come close. I'll cause my father to be killed by Yishmael. So what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? Before Esav had a chance to marry Yishmael's daughter, Yishmael died. And that's why the Medrash says, the very end, source number 4, so he says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lesat yada, the anahu, botkein de levava. I know everything. I know what your intentions are, and I'll take care of it. This is the politics today. The politics today is everyone tries to act like tzaddikim and condemn the Jewish people. So therefore, we have to do what we need, because there's nothing as born as Klal Yisrael, and understand how to deal with the public opinion, but to realize that the idea of this medrash, that Esav is not interested in the success and the welfare of Klal Yisrael. Now we can begin. So source number 5. Source number 5 is the Gemara Avodah Zarah, Tav Chavav Mid Aleph. Tani Ravua Kamen Rav Yochanan. There was a halacha back in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, Bisman and Avua, that there were certain Jews who didn't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is a time when there were open miracles, and therefore a person who did not believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person who maybe did not believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh, deserved to be condemned for this. And therefore it says those who rejected the Torah based on their own opinion, not because they found pleasure in doing Averis. Gemara says, if you found them in a pit, you would be allowed to take away the ladder, they just die in the pit. Now the Chazon Ish points out this halacha does not apply today. It only applied at a time when there were nisim gluyim, open miracles, and anyone who was a min, who did not believe in God, did not believe in Torah, was to be condemned for it. Today, we don't have miracles. It just doesn't apply. It does not apply. But if you look at the first line, ha'oved kochavim, those of the chavim who worship idols, the non-Jews, lo malin. You're not supposed to help them come up and not take away the ladder. In other words, if you're passing by a certain pit and there's a non-Jew, an Soloveichik, and a pagan, I'll use that terminology, who's in the pit, there's no ladder, and he calls for help, you can ignore him. If there's a ladder, you don't take the ladder away. That's the Gemara. So Tosfos and Daf Chafam V'Beis Tzach Avodah Zarah asked the question, what does that mean? You don't take the ladder away? There's an Soloveichik in there. There's a Maseches Sofrim, which Tosfos in Avodah Zarah says, Kosher Shepananim Harog, that the best of the Canaanim you kill. The Tosfos Rush points out, he quotes the Rush in source number 7, he has a different Lashon, Kosher Shebegoyim, the best of the non-Jews you go and you kill. So what is that? First of all, that's it's a condemnation to Torah. The Torah is the best of the non-Jews you kill. It's a Maseches Sofrim. And this was one of the points when Rabbi Chil and Paris debated with the Christians that they raised against the Torah. So Tosfos says, Tosfos B'Tzach Avodah Zarah, Tosfos Rosh, many others say no. Kosher Shebekananim, Kosher Shebegoyim, the best not you kill, that's talking about the Shas Milchama. When you have an enemy nation who is fighting a war, waging a war against the Jewish people, when you're dealing with the enemy who's fighting a war, you don't ask questions, who's a good non-Jew, who is a bad non-Jew. Go ahead and you have to go ahead and you have to kill them to defend yourself. You defend yourself. My father-in-law's grandfather was living in Russia. And why did he leave Russia? Because one morning, his neighbor, we'll call him Ivan, comes knocking on his door. It's a true story. And he says, oh, I'm so happy. He says, why? He says, you know, there was supposed to be a pogrom last night. I had my hatchet ready, and I would have to kill you. There's a pogrom, I have to kill, no choice. But they called the pogrom off. And they were friends. I'm so happy because you're my friend. This is his friend. My father-in-law's grandfather, I think, moved away as quickly as possible to America. But that is why kosher shebegoyim harog, and Tosfos says it's only b'shas, that shas muchama. How do Chazal know kosher shebegoyim harog? So Tosfos points out, because when Paro went to chase the Jewish people at the Yam Suf, he took the horses. The question is, where did Paro get horses? They all died in the plague of Dever. And the plague, where did they, the pestilence, they all died. He says, we know that Yarei Devar Hashem, all those Egyptians that feared the word of God, put their animals inside. So those who feared the word of God, they gave their horses to Paro, whether willing or unwillingly, to chase the Jewish people. So therefore, Chazal tell us, kosher shebegoyim harog. So, but that's only b'shas milchama. Okay, it's only b'shas milchama. So I'm gonna discuss that. I'm gonna come to that. Okay, I will get to that in a few minutes. It's actually on the sheet. Source number 11. Let's come to that now. So therefore, if you look at source number 8, he says the Rambam says, "Ein korsin bris, you don't make a bris l'shiva amamim, kedei shenasi imam shalom aniachos no'avodakum." You don't make a bris with the non-Jews, the pagans, actually the shiva amamim, and that they can stay and worship their idols. Shenemar lo sichros lembris is a Rambam Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perik Yud Halacha Aleph. Ella, they have to accept the Zion mitzvahs or be killed. And it says v'asur l'rachem aleihem. And it goes on, and therefore, if you see any of them, who's lost or drowning in the river, you don't go ahead and try to save him. If you find that he's about to die, you don't save him, you don't treat him. But to go ahead and to kill him, to push him into a bore, that's asur, because they're not doing of us milchama, right? But when they're doing of us milchama, then you're allowed to kill them. He says, and then he goes like this. Okay, fine, that's the Rambam. Again, so the Rambam holds like Tosfos that all these halachas of not killing them only applies shelo b'zman milchama. B'zman milchama, of course. The Rambam Mehilchos would say Shmiras Nefesh, source number 9. In source number 8, he spoke about the Canaanim. Here he speaks about the Goyim, non-Jews. Aval Goyim she'ein beineinu u'beinam milchama. The non-Jews, that there's no milchama between us and them. He says, we don't try to kill them, but it's usher to save them. We'll come back to this Rambam. So even the non-Jews. So he says, you find one of them falling into the ocean, you don't bring him up. He says, however, he says, they're not Jewish. Now, I'll point out I'll come back to that. So that's the Rambam. So when there is Muhammad, then of course. So I don't know, when we speak about people living here trying to hurt us, what's a Muhammad? But any terrorist who tries to attack us, there's no question. It's a Muhammad with him. There's no question it's a Muhammad. There's no question. So you're certainly not allowed to save him, right? We'll come back to that. Now, the question is, what does Rambam mean Goyim? So you look at source number 11. Source number 11 is the Meiri. All right, now, my father was very fond of this Meiri, even though many Rishonim do not quote this Meiri. However, he mentioned in his Sefer that Tzemach Tzedek holds this way, the Aruch HaShulchan holds this way, the Shilas Yavetz holds this way. My father held this Meiri halacha l'maisa. The Meiri says this halacha that you can't save certain goyim only applies to pagans. What do pagans mean? Pagans mean those who don't worship the Zion Umas, the Zion Mitzvos, the 7 Noachide laws, those who are uncivilized. The Meiri says in his days, they didn't exist, okay, except in the Far East. Therefore, he says, so when Rambam says of Lagoyim, he's talking about pagans. Now, the question is, my father points out, my father basically said, most Christians would not fall under the category of pagans, but he did say, I heard this from him. He said, somebody who wants to kill Jews. Being a pagan is not just someone who worships idols. Being a pagan is someone who doesn't care about murdering, someone who raises their children to murder. That is paganism. And therefore, this halacha about not saving somebody certainly applies to someone who feels it's his obligation or doesn't care. He doesn't mind killing Jews. There's no question. That is definitely, in other words, the Rambam, when he says this, would not apply to your neighbors in America or Australia or Canada or England or wherever you come from. But it would certainly apply to someone who does not keep seven Noachide laws. And not murdering. Murder is one of the 7 Noachide laws. And therefore, there's no question that if there is someone who is committing a terrorist act, you do what you got to do. You have to kill him, you kill him, right? And again, according to the Torah, and I understand there's an issue of international relations, public relations, but according to the Torah, someone who is a terrorist, you don't have to treat. Okay, what the world says, that's something people have to decide how it affects Am Yisrael. There's no question about that. But you have to remember, that's sort of what Cook quotes a ton of Eliyahu. There is no question about that. And if you look at source number 10, the Shulchan Aruch, which we live by, Oved Gelulim Mishiva Amimim, those who worship Avodah Zarah from the 7 nations. And again, I said, my father pointed out, based on the Meiri, that anyone who's civilized, it doesn't apply to, but being civilized does not just mean pagan. It does not mean not worshiping idols. It means someone who doesn't murder also. It says, She'ein beineinu b'neim milchama. There's no milchama. So the halacha is, you don't try to kill them. But if there is a milchama, you're allowed to. And certainly someone like that, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to treat. Okay? Again, we have to keep in mind how that's going to affect all the Am Yisrael. Keep that in mind. There's no question about that. But it's important to understand what the halacha is. What the halacha is. That is the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so that's as far as treating terrorists. Okay, if we go to source number 12 and source number 13, and source number 13, the question is: are you allowed to defend yourself, to defend Jews, where you might end up killing other passive standbyers, who are, I think it was more of an issue when my father was alive, that terrorists would be standing behind innocent bystanders. That's probably still an issue today. And if you try to save yourself by killing a terrorist, you might kill some innocent bystanders. I'm not talking who are Jewish. I'm talking about who come from the same nation as a terrorist. So you're allowed to do that. So my father pointed out, in source number 12, source number 13. Let's look at source number 13 first. Source number 13 is the halacha Bava Machteres. What is Bava Machteres? Bava Machteres is halacha that, let's say, for example, if someone breaks into my house at night. So I am, in order to defend myself, I actually am allowed, I don't have to, if I can assume reasonably maybe he won't kill me, but I am allowed to go ahead and kill him in self-defense. If someone breaks into my house and I have a hammer in my hand and I can throw the hammer at him, or I have a gun and just shoot him, I'm allowed to do that. That's what the Gemara says. It says, why? Well, it's very simple. Because he broke into my house, he knew there's a possibility I might stand up against him, right? And therefore he says, well, if this guy stands up against me, I'm going to kill him. So therefore he might attempt murder. Halacha is, habala hargacha, someone tries to kill you. Hashkin v'hargo, it's a simple halacha. I am allowed to defend myself even if I have to kill somebody. In source number 12, it's a Medrash Rabbah. So the HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe, Tzoros Midyanim, after the whole Maisa with Bilam and Midyan and Moab, afflict the Midyanim. Lama, Kitzor, it's a Medrash in Parshas Pinchas, Parsha Chav Aleph, Kitzorim heim lachem, because they have afflicted you. Mikan amru chachamim, habala hargacha, hashkem lahargo. Someone comes to kill you, you have to kill them. So my father asked the question, we already have this idea that you're allowed to defend yourself if someone might kill you from the Parsha Bava Machteres. Why do Chazal go ahead and tell me the same halacha from the halacha of Midyan? My father pointed out like this. The halacha of Habala Harach Hashkem V'Hargo by Bam Machteres, there was one individual. And defend myself, I might go ahead and kill one person. But what happens if there's a whole group of people? And in that group of people, there's two people that might kill me. But these are all the groups that it's all aligned together, and they all believe in the ideals of that group. And if I defend myself, I might kill people who are part of that group. So he says, that's the halacha we learned from Midyan. That if there's a group of people, there's a nation. And even if it's not, you can't have a milchama for technical reasons. You don't have a Sanhedrin, you don't have a Rimbatun, whatever it is. But still, when there's a group of people, you're allowed to defend yourself, even if you might kill other people who are in that group, who maybe the press refers to as innocent bystanders. But to defend yourself, you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to kill them. That's the idea. And I'll just point out that you have to be very, very careful not to put yourself and other Jews at risk because you're concerned about other people from that group who might not have a gun in their hand. If we'll skip a little bit to source number 22, 23, and 24. That's Bereshis Perek Lamed Beis, Pasuk Ches. There, the Torah tells us, Vayira Yaakov Me'od Vayetzer Lo, next week's Parsha. We'll look from the Shabbos. Yaakov was very afraid. Vayetzer, he was distressed, and he divided the nation. He divided his people, his family. It was already a nation ready. His ready first of them as right? That was with him. And why was he afraid? Famous Rashi. Vayira Shema Yehare, he was ready to make it killed. And Vayetzer Lo, Im Yaharaghu Esacherim. And he was very concerned, lest he do what? If he kills somebody else. Okay? Rashi, in certain editions, has in parentheses a different girsa, which obviously is not the main girsa of Rashi, because Rashi did not accept that girsa. And that's why I have here Chayim Paltiel, who brings down this other girsa of Rashi. And it's very similar to Rashi's own girsa, source number 24. Shema Yarog Acherim, lest he kills others. V'yitzlo im Yarog Acherim, that Rashi accepted. It's based on Chazal, different sources in the Medrash. And what Rashi did not accept, put in parentheses, is Shema, lest he kills others. So I think my father explained it this way. I was looking over notes, and I actually spoke. It was unclear how my father learned it out. I spoke to my brother about it. Together we came up with this idea. It says, what's the difference between Im Yarog and Shem Yarog Acherim? You know, after someone goes ahead and defends himself, and in the process, someone else was killed who maybe was an innocent bystander, who was not part of our nation, from another group, you might be a little distressed. You know, if he's really an innocent bystander, he says, but Rash not like Shema. Shema means beforehand. That he was concerned beforehand, be thinking, what happens, right, if I kill someone who doesn't have a gun to shoot me? Im Yarog, how will I feel afterwards? That Rashi accepted. But Shema, maybe beforehand, that you shouldn't think about, because when you're about to go ahead and defend yourself in front of the Jews, you have to do what you need to be defended. You don't worry what's going to happen if I kill, as I said, so-called people who maybe don't have a gun in their hand. Shema Yarog Acherim. We don't worry about Shema beforehand. Yaakov was afraid, how would I feel afterwards? But Shema means before. That we're not concerned because that will affect how we defend and protect the Jewish people themselves. Okay, so that's something very important to realize, that we have to, as I said, Rav Kook says, whatever we need to do to defend, because the needs of the Jewish nation are the most important. Okay, so I don't know, maybe now I sound like somewhat of a hawk. Maybe I am, but I'm not finished yet. However, I did hear from my father that Shalom is important too. Shalom is important also. We know that the Jewish people are compared to a Yonah, as the Gemara in Gittin says. I'm not going to go there because I know that a dove is a symbol of peace. I'm not exactly sure why, but we definitely are told by the Torah to believe in Shalom. If you look at source number 15, Parshas Shoftim, the Medrash, Parsha Hay, that when the Jews go to Muhammad, to war, we're commanded to seek peace with our enemy nation. Rabbanan say, Teidalach, Kama Gadol Kochel Shalom. How great is the Kochel Shalom? Afilu HaMilchama Shein Adam Yorosocha. When you go to war, that you go in with ammunition and weapons. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, first try to have peace. However, once you know there can't be peace, which is obvious, then it's time for Milchama. What does Jewish people feel are prisoners of war? I spoke about the Geneva Convention has no allowances for terrorists, no privileges, but prisoners of war there are. And the truth is the Torah definitely feels the same way. In Malachim Beis, Perek Vav, source number 16, Chaf Aleph, Chaf Beis, Chaf Gimel, when there's a war between our Melech Yisrael and Aram, so Melech Yisrael asks, should I hit the prisoners of war? And Elisha Navi says, don't hit the prisoners of war. You should go ahead and you should give them eat and drink and return them. Once the war is over, I guess, return them. They're not going to hurt us anymore. And Elisha Navi preceded the Geneva Convention. There's no question about that. As a matter of fact, if you look at source number 17 and 18, this was the bracha that Yitzchak gave Esav. Last week's parsha, Al Charba Chatichya. So the Ramban asks, what does it mean you should live by your sword? Yitzchak already gave Yaakov a bracha that, Mishmani Aretz, you'll get, he says, Mishmani Aretz Mitala Shemayim, you'll live. From the fat of the land and the dew of the heaven. He says, but what Yitzchak was telling Esav is, even when you fight a war against Yaakov, and Yaakov is victorious, you'll still live. Al Charbacha Yichya. Because prisoners of war, we treat properly. Okay. How about, but, I'll just point out, a prisoner of war treat properly because you send them back to their country and they don't harm us anymore. But to release a terrorist who will turn around, will turn around and try to kill other Jews, that's not a prisoner of war, that's a terrorist. And what Elisha told Melech Yisrael does not apply to a terrorist. Now, if you look at source number 19 and 20, so in Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph, David HaMelech speaks about the Yonas Elem. He says sometimes a Yonah has to be silent. The Jews are compared to a Yonah to be silent. But sometimes in source number 20, Tilim Perek Chav Gimel, the pasuk says, "Rabba Sabel Navshenu Halag Hashanina Abuz Legei Yonim," that we've had enough of being scorned by the nations of the world, and we're called a Gei Yonim, the proud dove. So the Malbim explains in source number 21 that Am Yisrael is described as a proud dove. What is a proud dove? A proud dove is somebody who will stand up to his enemies. All right? He says that when the Jewish people are entrenched in their borders, they will stand up. Yes, sometimes we were a Yonas Elam, a silent dove, when we were in Gullus. Now in Eretz Yisrael, we have to be a Geyonim, a proud dove, sticking up for ourselves and whatever necessary to make sure we defend ourselves. Okay, so now I come to the last part of this year. I have to tell you that last year, many years ago when I was younger, I was much more passionate about what's going on in the land of Israel. Got a little older, I guess, I'm not sure if a little wiser, but I chose my words a lot when I spoke in shul. Last year, after the Bigu and Har Nov, I got up in my shul. I spoke with a lot of passion. a lot of sadness. And I said that until we know differently, I'll explain. Last year I said, actually, any of the Palestinians are chashud that they could kill a Jew. That's all. As a matter of fact, as I said, the person who committed the pigua today had a license to work in Israel, and he killed a Jew. I think in general, most of my membership actually agreed with me. Some of them gone comfortable, and some said to me, I won't tell you what he's basically, you sounded like a racist. Okay? Could be. But I'm concerned about Klal Yisrael. I'm concerned about Klal Yisrael. Now, so in Ezra, Perek Daled, in Ezra Perek Daled, so when the Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael, and they were building the Beis HaMikdash, the Shomronim wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash with them. And Zerubbabel said to them, "Vayomru lahem Zerubbabel, Pasuk Gimel, Perek Daled, v'Yeshu Ashara Shavos Yisrael, lo lachem v'lanu livnos Beis Elokim, ki anachnu yachid nivna l'Hashem Elokei Yisrael kasher tzivanu hamelech koresh melech for us." They wanted no part of the Shomronim helping them. Why? Because they knew the Shomronim were interested in helping. Shomronim were interested, as we saw later on, in Sefer Nehemiah actually. The Shomronim were only interested in stopping, in causing problems. And that's the message you have to give. Someone who is not interested in the benefit of Eretz Yisrael, within Israel and Klal Yisrael, it's lo lachem v'lanu livnos, beis l'Elokeinu. And I go further than that. And I never mentioned this before, but I finally saw something last night preparing for the shir. That we know the Torah tells us in Sefer Bamidbar, in Sefer Yeshua, the Jews were warned not to allow the Canaanim to stay in Eretz Yisrael because there'll be thorns in your side. We're not talking about Canaanim. But the Torah Tamim in source number 26 from the Gemara Megillah, Afir Aleph Min Aleph, tells us that when Reb Levi would give a shir on Megillas Esther, Reb Levi would say, he would quote this pasuk, "V'mlo terishu es yoshar tzvnechem." You're going to have trouble. And the Torah to me may ask the question, what is the relevance of that to Esther, to Haman, to Mordechai? He says, so what is the idea? The idea is, the Torah points out, the relevance is very simple. Because since Shaul allowed Agag to remain alive, because of that there was trouble hundreds of years later. So Chazal are telling us this pasuk does not apply just to Canaanim. This pasuk applies to any nation, any non-Jew who's living in Israel and does not respect, does not want, does not see the benefit or want the state of Israel, the Jewish state, to survive. The Torah is telling us very clearly, non-Jews who don't want the state of Israel to survive, the Jewish state to survive, will be a thorn in our side. So what do? It's ludicrous. Could you imagine? It's ludicrous, the fact that in the Knesset, there are people who want the state of Israel to be destroyed. Zahavi and what's his name? Tibbin, what's the, Shem Rishon Yerkav, I forget their names from time to time. And Tibby. It's ridiculous. Right? Imagine any other state that you'd have someone sitting in the Congress and saying, "Yeah, I want to see the destruction of the United States of America." It's ridiculous. The Torah is telling us this. And yeah, okay, it's a democracy. But as Rav Kook says, it's democracy, but some things are more important than democracy, than even than Torah, what's to the benefit of the Jewish people. And I have to tell you, I remember my father saying this when he spoke at the Ramada Renaissance Hotel. In the 80s, I remember he said it, and I was actually surprised, because usually he was more moderate. My father says that any, I got to use the word Arab, or any non-Jew, who tries to kill a Jew should be executed. And anyone who is happy when a Jew is killed, who does not want to see the Jewish state succeed, should be sent out. You don't want to be here. You don't belong here. It's very simple. That's what the Torah tells us. It's not me, it's the Torah. The Torah says it. I can't help it, I know. The Torah says it. Now, the question is, what do? There's nowhere for them to go. I said, it's not practical. Okay? It's something to keep in mind. You never know what's going to be in the future. But I have to tell you, one of the members of my shul mentioned that, maybe every citizen should be obligated to sign a statement that they are loyal to the state of Israel. And if not, okay, maybe they shouldn't get certain benefits. Why should they have bituach leumi? Why should they be protected? If you don't care about the army, why should you be protected? Again, I know it might not be practical, relevant right now, but as I said at the beginning, it's important to keep in mind what the Torah really wants from us, and maybe what's the goal that we should work for. Okay, now, I would just like to finish off with 2 points. All right, source number 27. When I was a young boy, a teenager, so one of the most outspoken members of the Knesset, besides the Arab members who I don't remember, was Rabbi Meir Kahana. And at that time, I have to tell you that I used to discuss with my father. My father was not so fond of how Rabbi Meir Kahana would express his views in the Knesset. And I had discussions with my father about, well, if the Arabs are in the Knesset saying what they say, why can't Rabbi Kahana say what he wants to say? My father said a Jew is different. Okay, if we go ahead a few years, I forgot when I heard the news, but the day that Rabbi Kahana was killed, my father was giving shir in YU, one of the days he was in YU, and I'm not sure if we heard before the shir, someone heard during the shir. I couldn't be during the shir. It was before the days of Twitter and everything else. So I'm sure no one would have known, right? And after the shir, someone said, Rebbe, what do you think? What do you say about Rabbi Kahana? I said, uh-oh. I was very concerned. And my father said, give me a chumash. And he pulls out a par sefer, I'm not sure I think it was Vayigash, Vayechi. And he quoted the Gemara in source number 27. This Gemara is when Yaakov Avinu died, and the Shvatim took Yaakov to Eretz Yisrael to bury him. We all know, Chazal tell us, there was a problem. Esav said, hold on, you can't bury Yaakov here. There were 2 plots left in Maras Machpelah, in the cave, and we had 2 sons. I got 1 plot, your father got another plot, your father gave 1 plot to Leah, I got a 2nd plot. Says, no, you sold the plot to our father. What are you talking about? Says, we have the contract in Egypt. So they sent Naphtali to Egypt. Naphtali, Shlech, to get the contract. I'm not sure what that means. All right? I'm not sure exactly what that means. But then, so all of a sudden, they're waiting. Chushim ben Don, who, as we know, was deaf, didn't know what was going on. So he turns to his brothers, his cousins, his brothers. He says, his uncles, what's going on? So they tell him the story. So Chushim says, until Naphtali gets back, my grandfather should be lying in disgrace. He basically chopped off Esav's head. My father said it was a Pashat Svara. Esav deserved to be killed. What was everyone else thinking? Why did Chushim have to be the one to do it? My father explained, if you look at the end of Parshas Vayechi, it wasn't just the Shvatim. My father literally said this. It wasn't just the Shvatim that came to the Levaya of Yaakov. It was also all the Malachim. He says, how in the world could the Shvatim have killed Esav in front of all these kings? He says, what would the world opinion say? What would they say? Can you imagine? But Chushim ben Don, because he was deaf, didn't have to be concerned with world opinion. So he could do what was right. My father said, remember that? He said this. And maybe 10 boys heard it. What Rabbi Kahana said was absolutely correct. Just not, you can't say it because the world will criticize us and maybe harass us, but somebody had to say it. And we see today, someone to say it. And that's something to keep in mind, that we have to keep in mind what the goal is, because as the Tanakh Eliyahu says, the most important thing is the welfare, the benefit of the Jewish people. I want to finish off with one more thing. What can we do besides daven? Okay? I mean, obviously, I'm not suggesting everyone in this room take up arms. Maybe we should learn self-defense. But besides that, I think there's a fascinating Gemara, Maseches Gittin. There is it's a Medrash to Yerushalmi in Maseches Megillah, and it's a Medrash in this week's Parsha. Past week's Parsha. Kol Kol Yaakov v'yadayim v'day Esav. The voice was the voice of Yaakov, and the hands were hands of Esav. Which literally means, as we know, as Yaakov Avinu went ahead and said, that, Yitzchak said, I feel the hands of Yaakov, but it's the voice of Esav. So the Gemara says, what is this? I'm sorry. It's the voice of Yaakov, the hands are the hands of Esav. I'm sorry, okay. So he says, what is this? This is Andrianos Caesar. That when he killed in Alexandria in Egypt 600,000, more than 600,000 Jews. A multitude of Jews. Kol Yaakov, this is Andrianos Caesar, when he went ahead, and Kol Yaakov was when they mentioned different times, in the time of Beitar, when the Jews were killed. In other words, so therefore, a Kol Yaakov means that when Yadayim at the hands of Esav, and as I said before, Yadayim at Esav means two people who want to kill us, whether it's Esav or it's Ishmael. There always has to be a Kol Yaakov. It doesn't mean just to daven. I think a Kol Yaakov means we have to scream out and say it's not normal. I think the Israeli government would be very happy. We'd walk away and say, okay, what can you do? Say, how many people were killed? Compare it to what happened in Paris. That's absolutely incorrect. Hakol Kol Yaakov means that we have to always cry out and say, even if one Jew is in danger of being stabbed, we have to scream out, and we shouldn't say, okay, it's normal. That's Hakol Kol Yaakov. To finish off with a story. So during one of the Intifadas, Rabbi Beryl Wine was visiting Israel. He was still living in Muncie then. And he was staying in a hotel, and in that hotel, I think it was the Plaza actually, in that hotel, was also, I guess there was a tour of Christians, and there was a priest on the tour. And for some reason, he kept chasing Rabbi Wine. And Rabbi Wine kept running away from him. And finally, one day, he says, while he was still in the hotel, Rabbi Wine stepped into the elevator, and he snuck in too. He was stuck. He said, Rabbi Wine, I want to meet with you for a few minutes. He said, okay, tonight, for coffee. So they sat down, they had coffee together, and the priest turns to Rabbi Wine and says, how long is it going to go on? He's talking about the Palestinians, the poor Palestinians. Rabbi Wine looks at him and says to him, you know, during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, there was once a transport of children that was taken away. They were put on trucks and would be taken away, and we know obviously they would be taken away to gas to be killed. They first took the children away. And one mother came running, screaming and crying. There were two children on the truck. And she asked the SS soldier, can I have my children back? And the cruel SS soldier said, okay, you have two children, you can take one. And there she is standing there, looking at the younger child, the older child, and both of them have their hands held out. And finally she walks away because she can't choose. And Rabbi Wine says, all we want is to raise our children normally so we can choose. We don't have to choose. And I think Kol Yaakov, Yadayim to Esav, everything I said is very important. And hopefully one day this all can be implemented so Klal Yisrael can feel normal. But until that happens, besides davening, we have to scream out. We have to let the powers that be know this is unacceptable. And we can't think, okay, it's not so bad. You know, a few days happened. It's terrible. It's horrible. It's not acceptable. That's a Kol Yaakov. Hopefully, Kadosh Baruch Hu will hear our efforts, see our efforts, and we should have Yeshuas and Nechamas and see the destruction of our enemies. Have a wonderful evening.